Hi, I'm Gail McGuire. I've been teaching ethics and jurisprudence since 2007. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about consent, boundaries, and privacy. We know that in most jurisdictions, written consent is the gold standard. You will need to check with your registration and your jurisprudence documents and requirements for your area. However, if in doubt, written is always the way to go. We can also request oral consent. That may or may not be valid in your particular area. And generally speaking, it's easier to argue in a court. So we do recommend written consent wherever possible. Sometimes you can add additional consent with oral permission. So perhaps you're doing something new or different or a more dangerous procedure. It could be reasonable to add an oral consent further on down the road. So you've done your initial consent with written procedures in the very beginning of your meeting with the patient. And then as the treatments have gone by, maybe of doing something different, something more intimate, something a little bit more advanced with more risk to it. So you could potentially do oral consent at those times. What we also want to ensure is that patient privacy is always protected. How I explain this to my students is that no other person should be able to understand or figure out who your patients are. So this means that you have trained your receptionist, that your marketing team knows, and that you yourself operate in a way that is cognizant of who's around. Is this conversation confidential? What am I saying over the phone? Is there a waiting room full of people that are going to hear me repeat that patient's name and address and phone number or anything else? Are my walls soundproof? Is the staff room appropriate? Those kind of conversations and considerations need to be considered. I also wanted to touch on boundaries. I think boundaries can be particularly difficult in smaller towns. I don't envy people that have to work in amongst their colleagues, their friends, but we all, at some point, are probably going to treat friends and colleagues and family members. Family members, it may not be advisable, depending on how close you are to them. Can you be subjective enough to treat them? Insurance is more than likely not going to reimburse you for those treatments. So if you provide naturopathic, acupuncture, whatever your field is, you provide treatments to a family member, you can imagine that insurance companies are not likely to want to pay you for that. But keeping good boundaries intact with your friends that come to see you. For myself, I handle this with just addressing it head on, right as soon as I first meet that patient. In my room, I know that we know each other socially, but inside this room, everything is confidential. So please know that everything that we talk about in this room stays in this room. I want them to know that there's no chance that I'm going to talk to them the next time I see them socially. So if I see them at a potluck dinner, we're not going to talk about your healthcare. I'm not judging you for your decisions at that potluck. I think creating really good boundaries at the very start is always really, really helpful for how you plan to go forward. With that, too, I think having good boundaries that you maintain, whether they're your friend or someone that you've never met before, I think boundaries are so important. Keeping that professionalism alive and not letting your guard drop, even as you become maybe more friendly with patients. You've known them for maybe many years at some points. We do want to consider that depending on your patient and maybe the traumas that they've been through, that trust may be lost at any given time. So do keep your professional boundaries up at all times, no matter if it's a new patient, someone that you know, someone that you've known for years. Keeping good professional boundaries will always keep you out of trouble.